So here we go. Okay. Welcome to the channel. This is Ivor Kovac and my partner Stilgar. And this is the channel where we talk about events from history. And we both know a bit more about history than the average person. So Stilgar, he used to teach history, and I actually have a degree in history. But what we're going to try to do is each come up with some topic or event from history, and in some cases mythology, that the other person doesn't know about. So we're each trying to surprise the other guy, and the reactions are genuine. And today is my turn to introduce the first topic. So Stilgar, I have a character from history, from ancient history, and you can tell me if you ever heard about this guy. His name is Ashurnasirpal II. Have you heard of him?
Asher?
Ashurnasirpal II.
Ooh. I have not, but Nasser makes me think he is somebody from Syria or someplace like that, or...
Well, actually, yes, he is from the Middle East.
Okay.
So you're not too far off the mark. So Ashurnasirpal was one of the kings of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. I'm sure you've heard of the Assyrians before, right?
Yes, they were quite brutal.
Yeah, they were. They're mentioned in the Bible. So I have what do you know about the origins of the Assyrians?
Ooh, I know a little bit about about their warfare, really, and how they would compete with basically the Babylonians and the Egyptians for power.
Mm-hmm.
And I know as a people there are still Assyrians today, but they're all spread out over the Middle East because their empire was, anyway, it's no longer there. So I wouldn't know what their origin is, to be honest.
Okay, so I've got something on that. Let me just get my notes up here. I have too many things open on this computer. That's not good. Okay, so here's what I've got. So the Assyrians, they take their name from the god Ashur, who was the patron god. It was like the god of the city for, there's a city called Ashur. And I guess, each city would have a god, and then people would have their household gods. So Ashur started out as the patron god of the city Ashur, which bears his name. And I don't know what the current state of Ashur is, the city, if it's even still around. My guess is not. So Ashur was eventually promoted to be the chief god of the Assyrian pantheon, and the Assyrian kings served as the high priests for Ashur. The Assyrians believed that he oversaw their battles as they were fighting and that he was protecting them, and he would help give them the victory, supposedly. Now, Ashur is also mentioned in the Bible, but he's mentioned differently. According to Genesis 10, Ashur is one of the sons of Shem, that he had after the flood when it lists the genealogy of Shem. And he's responsible for founding the cities of Nineveh, Rehoboth, and Calah. So, it's quite possible, and this is my speculation, that Ashur kind of was viewed as a cultural patriarch for the early Assyrians, kind of like the Jews view Abraham. And, eventually it became garbled to the point where they deified him as a god and came to worship him. And there's some images of Ashur in stone relief carvings, which I'll include in the slideshow when we render this. But in the Bible, the Assyrians are mentioned as enemies, of course. And Ashurnasirpal II, he's a king in the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And the Neo-Assyrian Empire is the guys that ransacked Israel. And they start after the Bronze Age collapse. You know what the Bronze Age collapse is, right?
The Bronze Age... What?
Collapse.
Sorry? What?
The Bronze Age collapse? Yeah, I didn't even know about the Bronze Age collapse until like a few months ago.
No.
But apparently, there's barbarians that came on ships that came by sea, like a few different groups of barbarians, and they ransacked different countries around the Mediterranean rim. And it was like a kind of like a small dark age that followed. But after that, the Neo-Assyrian Empire starts, and they start to use iron. And based on what I found, it looks like they were the first empire to use iron weapons, or at least to use them on a great scale. And of course, iron is easier to work than bronze, so it allows for mass production. And after that, the Assyrians, they actually create the world's first professional army, which is significant because, in the Bronze Age days, it'd be like you'd be a small farmer tending your land, and the king would be like, all right, Stilgar, you're going to serve in the army. We're going to war against Abimelech or the Canaanites or whoever. And you'd be like, oh, well, I got to plant my seeds. Yeah, well, actually, I think they timed their wars usually so it didn't interfere with the planting and harvest. But be like, oh, I'm not finished with my work here. Oh, well, when we go and invade the Canaanites, just take whatever you can carry. Take the grain, maybe a couple animals, maybe a woman if you need a wife, all that stuff. So that's not really a professional army. That's like you're just drafted when they need you. So professional army is where your job is to be the soldier, and that's your job, and you get paid for that. I would assume even during peacetime. But that doesn't mean they didn't loot people. So Ashurnasirpal is the third king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and his name, and now as far as the meaning of his name goes, I found this on Wikipedia, so you could take it with a grain of salt, but it means Ashur is the guardian of the heir. So some of these guys, they had the name of their god included in their name, like Ashurbanipal is another one. And this dude, he was famous for, extreme tactics and brutality. And one of the first things he did when he took over was there was some governor that rebelled, and he had that guy skinned alive in public. And so that dealt with the problem of rebellion. That he didn't have a problem from that reason.
Yeah, that was a typical Assyrian way of dealing with rebellion, was mostly skinning people.
Yeah, they skinned people alive. They pierced people over spikes, I guess wooden spikes.
Yeah.
And they also burned people to death. And Ashurnasirpal II, he conquered all of Mesopotamia, and he brought some new regions under their control. Like he conquered the Hittites, what was left of them, and what do you call them? The Arameans, which today would be Syria. And I have some quotes from some of his actions that he took. I'm sure people will be interested in these. So these are quotes from the steles, where they commemorated stuff, they carved stuff into stone. Mm-hmm. So he says here, I built a pillar over against the city gate, and I flayed all the chiefs who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. Some I impaled upon the pillar on stakes, and others I bound to stakes around the pillar. I cut the limbs off the officers who had rebelled. Many captives I burned with fire, and many I took as living captives. For some I cut off their noses, their ears, and their fingers. Of many I put out their eyes. I made one pillar of the living and another of heads, and I bound their heads. It's so extreme. It's like,
yeah, it's a friendly. Yeah. Wonder what he was trying to say. Right? Yeah.
It's so crazy, right? And I bound their heads to tree trunks round about the city. The young men and maidens I consumed with fire. The rest of their warriors I consumed with thirst in the desert of the Euphrates. So it's interesting because later on you're going to have Islam, which will come into this region, and they'll also spread through conquest. And one of the things they would do, which I mean, like they consider like women to be war booty and plunder.
Yes.
But these guys, it looks like they didn't even bother with that. They just killed the women.
Yes, that's actually, sometimes, I don't want to go off on a tangent. You should go back to your story. But that's probably why some of the Muslims thought that they were actually, quite progressive or lenient for their time, even though they were enslaving and raping and to some extent even killing some of their slaves. It was still lenient compared to some of the things that happened in ancient times. Yeah, interesting.
Well, they weren't as sadistic as the Assyrians were. Of course, the Assyrians were no longer really a significant factor by the time Islam emerges. The main groups they were going to take over.
Persians were actually far more lenient as well when it came to this kind of thing. But yes, yeah.
The Persians are much less. The Persians are Indo-European conqueror, and I mean, we can talk about Indo-European
They would give
conquest.
like if there was a city in rebellion, they would give them a choice, right? They're like, you know what, like, yeah, we know you rebelled, and why don't you just come back to us, and we'll lower your taxes, and we'll just pretend this never happened. But if you don't, then we're still gonna let you have it. But the Assyrians, there was no going back, right? If you rebelled as a city, there was no peace offer. There was just there was just punishment to the max. And then but it's interesting, some of these cruelties, and they would, I guess, put it out. It's almost like putting out pamphlets saying like hey, this is what happens to you if you don't fall in line.
They definitely would make an example out of their enemies. And comparing them with the Persians, I think one of the reasons the Persians lasted so much longer than the Assyrians did is because they were so much more benign. Like the Persians, they would rebuild stuff that the previous groups, the Babylonians and the Assyrians, had destroyed. They let people return to their homelands. They were much more like a mixture of mercy and destruction. But that's like Indo-European conquerors. One thing that they do is they always will try and present themselves like, we're the good guys and this is for your own good. Really, it is. But the Semitic conquerors are more like, you better surrender or we're going to do something horrible to you. And if you don't surrender, then that's when the horror show would start. And I have another quote.
Story, if I from an Assyrian, I don't know if it was an Assyrian that rebelled, but it was some royalty that rebelled, and this regent, they took his son and then they killed him and skinned him in front of his eyes, and then they poked out his eyes, so that was the last thing he would ever see. After which they also skinned him alive. So
that was the Assyrians,
they were next level. Yeah.
Yeah, the Babylonians, they would do some of that stuff, and of course the Babylonians are the ones that will eventually crush the Assyrians. And they did something like that. I think it was to Zedekiah, the last king of Judah. But I mean, that's another thing. I have another quote here, like one more quote about his massacre. Let's see here. Yeah. So, is this the one? Okay. In strife and conflict, I besieged and conquered the city. I felled 3,000 of their fighting men with the sword. I captured many troops alive. I cut off some of their arms and hands. I cut off their noses and ears and extremities. I gouged out the eyes of many troops. I made one pile of the living and one pile. Oh, sorry. I made one pile of living and one of heads. I hung their heads on trees around the city. And later Assyrian kings, they would kind of continue these practices. And I found in my image search, some images of relief carvings of them doing this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think this guy, he's the one that kind of leveled it up, so to speak. So, yeah, you might be hearing my son. He decided to come here and listen to the lecture. I left the door open. So, okay. So then also some of the less violent things, because he wasn't just violent and destructive. He also was a builder and an organizer. And one of the things he would do is well, of course, the conquered people would be put under heavy, heavy taxes. And some would be taken off as slaves, and others would be deported and put into a new location, which is what ends up happening to the Israelites later, but it's not Ashurnasirpal that does it. It's a later guy that comes. But he repairs and renovates Nineveh, Ashur, and Calhoun, also called, which is another word for Kala or Kala. It's interesting, right? Those cities that were founded by Ashur, the original guy, were rebuilt by this guy. And Calhoun was mostly ruins at the time. Like, I don't think anybody lived there at all. But Ashurnasirpal rebuilt it with slave labor. And he built a huge, huge palace there. And it was finished in 897 BC. And when it was done, Ashurnasirpal threw a massive feast that lasted 10 days. And after that, he commemorated it with the banquet stele of Ashurnasirpal. I don't know if that's what they called it, but that's what we call it today. And let's see, what was I going to say about that? Yeah, so one of the reasons he did that, he moved the capital city because he wanted to downgrade the city of Ashur. Like, he didn't want them to have a special status. And I believe, I'm not completely sure, but I think he was the one who actually started to put them under heavy taxation as well. Because the Assyrians, they loved their taxes, and like the capital city of Ashur, they had some kind of exempt status where they didn't have to pay as much in taxes. And eventually that was changed because these people, they wanted to get their taxes. I think Ashurnasirpal was the one who decided to start taxing Ashur. But yeah, I mean, I have some of the banquet stele here that was written by Ashurnasirpal. And let's see, the way he talks, I'll just read some of it, not all of it. But he says, "This is the palace of Ashurnasirpal, the high priest of Ashur, chosen by Enlil and Ninurta, the favorite of Anu and of Dagon, who is destruction personified among all the great gods, the legitimate king, the king of the world, the king of Assyria, son of Tukulti-Ninurta, great king, legitimate king, king of the world, king of Assyria, who was the son of Adad-nirari, likewise great king, legitimate king, king of the world, and king of Assyria, the heroic warrior who always acts who always acts upon trust-inspiring signs given by his lord Ashur, and therefore has no rival among the rulers of the four quarters of the world, the shepherd of all mortals, not afraid of battle, but on-rushing flood, which brooks no resistance, the king who subdues the unsubmissive and rules over all mankind, the king who always acts upon trust-inspiring signs, blah, blah, blah." I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's interesting that, from reading this, I get the impression that he was trying to take over the whole world, right? Sounds like it.
The known world, right? And I mean, the Assyrians were building cities so large. And what year did you say this was? 800s?
Yeah, 800 BC.
BCE, and they wouldn't be matched for like half a millennium because they were incredibly powerful
Yeah.
people. Yeah,
And merciless.
and merciless. Yeah,
It's like, if you surrender to us now, we'll let you keep your city and pay ridiculously high taxes. If you don't surrender to us, then you're going to have like an involuntary medical operation. You're going to have some non-elective surgery.
yeah.
We'll destroy everything that you have. Oh man,
It's amazing, right? How the ethics of how that was normal, and people would, at those mass executions, people would probably come out and look at them because it was a sight to be seen, like how different those people were. But then again, biologically, there's like no difference between somebody, it's 3,000 years ago, and somebody today, almost 3,000. But like what made them so ruthless in how they acted? It's fascinating.
well, also, yeah. Well, one thing is it's a pre-Christian society, and you know, there's no concept of the golden rule, like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I looked a little bit into their religion, and it looks like their afterlife concept was stemmed largely from the Sumerian one, where you die, you go to the realm of Nurgle, which is like a dark and foggy place. And basically, everybody is going to Nurgle no matter what they do, so it doesn't really matter. So they would just do
Is it like
anything.
Hades, I guess, or as
No, it's
well.
different. It's different than Hades, because in Hades there was a section for the virtuous and the criminal. Like the virtuous would go to the Elysian fields, the criminal
Yeah.
would go to Tartarus. But with
So I believe that
Nurgle,
was added later on, if I'm not mistaken. I think
uh,
at first they had Hades as well. But yeah, you're right. They did
well,
have.
Hades is the collective name for the realm as well as the god of the dead.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Assyrian mythology was different, and I need to learn more about it. I'd like to, but these guys, they
Oh,
had no concept of
yeah.
that. It was all about power and control, and also, I don't know that regular people so much would watch the executions like an Assyrian civilian. This was stuff that was carried out on the military campaigns where the city resisted. It was going to get jacked up pretty hard. And whatever survivors were left, they were going to talk about what happened and spread it, especially the survivors that were missing body parts. So
Yeah.
that's why, like Jonah,
Mhm.
and when Jonah he comes in later, I think at the time, I mean, later the capital was shifted to Nineveh after Ashurnasirpal II is gone. But that's why, when God said, I'm going to destroy Nineveh, he was like, great. He didn't want to go there and save them. He wanted them to be destroyed because they were a scourge and a thing of terror on the ancient world. They're definitely more brutal and violent than the Mongols, and more brutal and violent than the Nazis. So it was, I mean, it was the kind of thing that today you would see in a horror movie, like a slasher thriller, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah. I wouldn't even go see it, but because it would, give me nightmares. But for sure, yeah, this is crazy stuff.
Could you
Isn't
imagine
also
being a soldier in the Assyrian army and having to
yeah,
do this stuff?
yeah,
I'd
yeah.
be
But
like, I
I
don't even want to
don't
watch
know
it.
about that. That's an interesting part. But one thing about the Old Testament, isn't Cyrus the first king of the Persians? Isn't he also like celebrated as sent by God to destroy the Assyrian Empire?
No, the
He did.
Persians overthrew the Babylonians. The Babylonians
Ah,
overthrew the
yes, the
Assyrians.
Babylonians. Yeah, and but they were also a scourge, right? It's
They were, yeah, they were a scourge, but they weren't quite as graphic as the Assyrians. The Assyrians used to make body art with like human skins and severed heads. The
You know what
Babylonians.
I found interesting about this time also is that they would when they capture somebody else's territory, they would steal their gods, like they would behead them and then take them with them, like and kind of, you know, it's like, oh, your god is you know, we took your god.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
showed them that their god has no power. He can't even
yeah,
stop.
yeah, it's kind of like the ultimate domination kind of thing, you know, like yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So, man,
All right, man.
so yeah, that's all I have. I guess I'm done unless you want to say something further.
No, I mean, I would love to hear. Actually, I need to read up more about this time period because they were so advanced when it came to like city building and engineering and weaponry and things like that. Um, and this whole area is just you know, there's been all these ancient kingdoms there, and we kind of don't think about them anymore. At least I don't. But
Yeah,
yeah, no,
because Islam has replaced most of the original
yeah,
cultures that were there. So
yeah,
today people think of the Middle East as being, for the most part, a homogeneous region. But actually, you know, the descendants of the Assyrians are still around, and they're mostly Christian. And then I think they still speak some language which is derived from their ancestral language. And then you also have the Aramean, you know, this the Aramaic language is still used by like the Syrian Orthodox Church, not to be confused with the Assyrians. And you also have the Coptic community, which is the only thing left of classical Egypt. And as far as that goes, I think those are the only remnants of these ancient cultures. Everybody
I mean,
else has
still
been
have some
absorbed.
remnants of Persian culture.
Yeah, the Persian culture survived a bit better because it's an Indo-European language, or an Indo-European culture, which was already very different culturally from the Semitic cultures, and their language is not at all related to Arabic or Hebrew or Akkadian. If Akkadian, I think Akkadian was just a written text, but like it's totally different. So an Indo-European speaker would not as easily be able to learn Arabic as would somebody who spoke, Aramaic or Hebrew as their first language, because the linguistic gulf is greater. And I
Yeah,
think that's one of the reasons why the Persian culture survived so much better than the other Middle
and
Eastern
probably
culture.
also because it was an advanced, very highly advanced culture. So it's harder to kind of wipe out than some of the other cultures potentially. Are there any Babylonians around?
There's
One,
some group called the Chaldeans. I haven't really looked into them. I don't know much about them. I think
okay,
it might just be like a church denomination. I think I don't know, man. Maybe you can research that and make it surprise
maybe
me with a
for
topic.
a different topic, for another topic. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
All right, man, I appreciate it. Cool story. Is there
awesome.
any questions or any remarks about future stories? Please let either Ivor or myself, Stilber, know, right? Anything from your side?
I don't have anything to add, but as we're a new channel, um, if we do have any followers or if anyone is passing through, if you ask us a question or suggest a topic, there's a very good chance that we will do it
Yeah.
because right now we're at the stage where we're trying to build a following. So just make sure that you reach out to us and if you want something, assuming anybody's here, and eventually there will be people here. So yeah,
Cool. All right,
that's it.
man. Well, I appreciate it, and
Until next time.
for the next one.